Natalie Sideserf here of Sideserf Cake Studio, and I'm going to show you how I made a ZX 2K Boost cake. So let's get started. Here I made a custom cake board in the same shape as the sole of the real sneaker. You can see that the cake board curves up slightly at the heel and the toe. So the sole of this shoe is the first thing I'm going to work on. I'm sprinkling some cornstarch on a mat. So this cornstarch helps me keep everything from sticking to pretty much everything. Like all of my cakes, I'm covering this one in modeling chocolate, and modeling chocolate has a tendency to get very, very sticky. I'm rolling out black modeling chocolate that I will use to cover the cake board. So once it's rolled out, I spray a few spritzes of water onto the chocolate. Then I place the cake board on top and I trim away the excess chocolate. Then I flip the cake board over, and using a smoother, I smooth out the top. Not only because I want it to look smooth, but because I want to make sure that that chocolate is sealed to that cake board. Then I flip the cake board back over and I trim away the excess modeling chocolate. Next, I sculpt the edges of the sole to create grooves in the tread of the shoe. So every ½ inch or so, I make a new dent until the entire outside edge of the chocolate sole has this pattern in the tread. Speaking of tread, I learned something new while working on this cake. I learned that I've been using the word tread wrong my whole life. I thought that tread meant the pattern on the bottom of shoes, but tread is actually the rubber, and those grooves are called the tread pattern. So if you think about it, you can have completely smooth tread with no pattern. It's on some race car tires and some shoes. Anyway, now that the tread pattern is sculpted, I'm going to set the sole aside to firm up and get back to room temperature. So while I wait, I'm going to prep the cake layers. I cut out a stencil out of parchment paper that is in the shape of the sole of the shoe, and I'm using this to cut out 3 sole-shaped cake layers. A little side note, the easiest way to carve cake is while it's chilled. That way you get these really nice clean cuts, and the cake doesn't crumble as much as it would at room temperature. I'm spreading some blueberry buttercream directly on the cake board, followed by a layer of lemon cake. Then another layer of buttercream, and another layer of cake, and another layer of buttercream, and another layer of cake, until this cake is stacked 3 layers high. Now it's time to carve the cake in the shape of the sneaker, starting with the toe, shaving off just like a little bit of cake at a time with a serrated knife. I have the brand new, extremely clean, real sneaker nearby so that I can try my best to replicate that exact shape. Once the toe is to my liking, I round out the heel and I shape that a bit. I want to create the illusion that the sneaker is hollow. So to do that, I just cut a hole a couple inches deep in the top, and that'll do the trick. I'm gonna trick ya. It's not really hollow. Now that the cake is carved, I cover the entire thing in a thin layer of buttercream. I'm using white buttercream for this crumb coat because, to be honest, that blue buttercream is super messy. And these cakes are white. So I'm trying my best to stay as clean as possible so I don't have to go and try to clean up some blue smudges later. Keeping it clean is really hard for me. I'm a messy woman. And now it's time to cover the cake in modeling chocolate. There is a very subtle round texture on the sole of the real sneaker. So to create this effect, I just wrap a straw in plastic wrap and then I press lightly onto the chocolate. That plastic wrap helps to soften those marks because I don't want them to be too distinct. They need to be very subtle. I busted out the airbrush for this cake because there is this really nice gradient on the side of the sneaker that goes from pink to blue. I started with pink because it's the lighter of the 2 colors, and I typically start with the lighter color when I airbrush. I made sure to airbrush the soles of the shoe cake before covering the rest of the cake, because if I get color on the uncovered cake, it really doesn't matter. It's just gonna get covered in white modeling chocolate soon enough. The only cleaning of color that I had to do was with water and a paintbrush on a few of the black areas of the sole, but because it's black, it's really easy to clean. So I think I did it the best way you can. The airbrushing is done, so let's cover the rest of this sneaker in off-white modeling chocolate. This shoe is going to be built up in layers of modeling chocolate, so I'm rolling out the modeling chocolate pretty darn thin so it doesn't bulk the cake up too much and start to make the shoe look like it's maybe too wide or too puffy. I just smooth out the chocolate, work it around the cake, and then I trim away the excess chocolate with a blade. And with a sculpting tool, I clean up where the top of the shoe and the sole meet. Next, with a pointed tool, I'm scoring lines onto the chocolate of each of the larger shapes that are on the real shoe. The real shoe is the perfect model. It stayed very still, and it didn't even complain at all when I poked it with a sculpting tool. I'm sorry. Oh, bad joke. To create this effect of the small mesh texture, I used a wheel punch tool. So this is an embossing tool that typically is used in crafts and in sewing, but it's also great for cake. Next, I roll out more modeling chocolate and I press a clean texture mat onto it. So it's gonna give this super subtle fabric texture, like I see on the real shoe. And to create a larger mesh pattern, I cut a straw down slightly, I bent it into a small pointed oval shape, and then I taped it closed. Now I can just punch out holes to look like the larger mesh pattern. Then I place this layer on top of the sneaker cake, and I match it up so that the larger mesh is placed over top of that smaller mesh area, the area that I punched with those super tiny holes with that fun wheel punching tool. And I love this effect. It's so fun. Now I'm cleaning up the edges again with a blade. Gotta keep it clean, clean, clean. Next, I'm adding a chunk of modeling chocolate to shape the sneaker a bit. And then I cover the remaining cake in a thin layer of modeling chocolate to make it look more finished. It's about time I give the heel of this shoe a little love, or a lot of love. This sneaker is made up of many different pieces and layers, which sounds complicated, but it actually makes my life a lot easier because then I can trim the chocolate away where there's actual seams in the real sneaker. It's great. It's like I'm building a real Adidas shoe. Now that the cake is covered front and back, I start working on more of the details. So I'm adding marks with the sculpting tools, the straws, and that little wheel punch tool that I love so much. I think the biggest challenge regarding this cake is that the edible materials that I'm using to recreate this sneaker are dense, they're bulky, they're really heavy, but the real shoe is squishy and airy and light. So basically, it's the exact opposite of everything that I use to make a sculpted cake. That means I have to try my best to sculpt this cake in a way that reads as light and airy, even if the materials I'm using aren't. This is quite the challenge, but when it comes to cake, I'm always up for a challenge. Bring it on. Let's add some more color to this delicious footwear. So for the heel loop, I'm rolling out some blue modeling chocolate and I'm adding a line texture with a texture mat. Then I very carefully attach it to the back of the cake. Now that we've got a loop, it's time to add that fun pink back with the Adidas logo. This is where the real shoe comes in. So I want to make sure that I get this logo just right. So I'm using a food-safe silicone mold to recreate it. While soft, I press the silicone putty onto the actual shoe, then I peel it away, and look how beautiful and easy that was. Next, I roll out pink modeling chocolate and I brush cornstarch directly onto the mold and onto the chocolate. And then all I have to do is press that mold onto the pink chocolate, peel it away, and I have the perfect edible logo. The last thing I do is I clean up the edges a bit with a blade and I shape it, and then it's ready to be placed on the cake. I really want my pink to pop like the pink on the real shoe, so to brighten it up a bit, I hand painted bright pink onto the chocolate. I find that kneading color directly into the chocolate is a great start, but to get that super vibrant color, painting a thin layer of color on the outside is the way to go. Now I'm adding a clean layer of white chocolate on the heel that just slightly overlaps the pink, and then comes the final layer of blue to that squishy heel of the shoe. Okay. For the signature line that comes on the side of the Adidas shoes, I rolled out an extremely thin layer of modeling chocolate and I placed the strips on evenly. I did the same for the last layer of the shapes on the sneaker too. You know, making this cake is really fun. It's like I'm building a real Adidas sneaker. Only instead of like nylon and cotton and leather, I'm using chocolate and buttercream and cake. Now it's time to hand paint. And it's funny because painting details with regular old white is absolutely my favorite part about this cake. So on the real shoe, you can see that the mesh material has an off-white color and the other material is more of a bright white. So modeling chocolate can be made white, but it's never truly a very bright white. It always has a slight off-white color. So I decided to paint the bright white areas with white powdered food color diluted with clear extract. The extract evaporates quickly because it's mostly alcohol, and it leaves behind that super nice, pretty, smooth, beautiful matte white color that looks just like the real shoe. I love it. You can really see the two white tones, and that subtle difference in color makes this cake for me. It's so pretty. The only other painting that's left is the Adidas logo that's in white on the sole of the shoe and a tiny black Adidas logo on the tongue. Let's lace these sneakers. So using an extruder, I extruded modeling chocolate to the size and length of the real shoelace. And then I also extruded some thin pink chocolate for the loops. To start, I'm placing the chocolate laces on the bottom of the shoe, and then I'm adding that pink loop accent. Then I place the laces onto the cake, and I add pink loops at every turn. This is my second favorite part of this cake. The white food color effect, that's my favorite, but I really like those pink loops. They look so fragile, and also that pop of pink color on the shoe is just a great design. Lacing this cake was time-consuming, but also really fun. Things can be both time-consuming and fun, I swear. That is very common in cake. And there you have it, an Adidas shoe cake. And now, let's cut the cake. This is an oddly satisfying sneaker, and this is an oddly satisfying cake. What a pair. Oh my God, I'm sorry. That's the last joke, I swear.